What is HTML elements and what is nesting? That's what we're going to explore in today's video. Inside Visual Studio Code, I'm going to create a new text file. I'm going to select the language. I'm going to select HTML. I'm going to save this file as test3. A nifty trick, if you write exclamation mark, you see that a suggestion pops up. And if you choose the first one here, you can click it or just hit enter. A kind of a standard HTML document pops up. So these are kind of the standard elements that you need to include in your HTML, or that at least is very, very common to include. So you have your document type, the line that says that this is HTML. You have your opening HTML tag together with a closing HTML tag. Don't mind all the information in light blue and orange for now. We're going to get to that. Under our HTML tag, we have a head tag, both an opening and a closing one. And under the head tag, we have a body element, a closing and an opening body element. And inside our head element, we see that something has been indented. Actually, things are already indented. If I save here now, we see that inside the HTML, we have indented our head element as well as our body element. Inside our head element is a meta element. This is basically information for the browser when it reads our HTML document that it needs. So for example, this UTF-8 says to the browser that this document has a certain character set. Basically, it's using the Latin alphabet. It's using the numerical numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. So that's what this tells the browser. The next line, the next two lines, basically tell the browser how to interact with older web browsers like Internet Explorer, like you see here, and also how to kind of make it display on our browsers when the screen size is of different sizes. So it's kind of these three lines here are very standard elements, and you should always include them in your document. It's rare that you're going to be changing these standard documents here, standard information here. That's why I would highly suggest that you get used to just starting your HTML documents by pressing exclamation mark and just clicking the exclamation mark to get that standard info. I'm going to delete that second one. As we can see here in the HTML opening tag, there is another piece of information, which is basically saying lang equals, and then quotation marks, en. So here we're saying that inside of this HTML document, the language is going to be set to English. The shorthand for English is en. So this is another standard practice. It's for the Chrome browser or Internet Explorer browser or Brave browser to know that this page that you're creating is in English. And when you get asked if you want a specific website to be translated to your language, maybe you have a different language than English like me, then that's how the browser knows what language to translate to and from, because people have written it specifically inside of the HTML. I'm going to show you how to get the information for example, writing your HTML in a different language. Let's say we wanted to write it in French. Well, then I'm going to have you open your browser. I'm going to have you write HTML and Mozilla, and then it's probably going to be the first link here, which is https://developer.mozilla.org. This has all the information. It's kind of the textbook for web development. So here you see a description of HTML, hypertext markup language. You see the different elements that we have. So that's cool. We are interested in the language of our HTML. So I'm just going to write lang here, because that was showing up, right? And then we see that the fourth option here shows that the lang is a global attribute that helps define the language of an element. So That's exactly what we were writing in our head section. Here you see their example is in a different element, but this is where we basically are defining that the whole entire document is in one specific language. If we scroll down, so here we can see that there's a link to find the correct subtag codes for a language. Try the language subtag lookup, which gives us another web page. So let's just type French here. So FR. So if we write, instead of English, in our code here, FR, this text would now be read by the browser as written in French. So that was a little detour into how to look up information for yourself when you are writing code. It might seem like a lot of info and like information overload on this developer.mozilla website, but it is a really useful site to get to know early on in your coding, because it really helps you to research and find the solutions for yourself, because there's a lot of elements and there's a lot of definitions, there's a lot of attributes that are common and uncommon, and sometimes you have to use things that are not very common, that there's not a lot of tutorials for, and it's very useful to know where to get the information for yourself. So back to our code, we have now defined that this language is French. We're going to just change that back to English because we're writing in English. These are the elements that we so far have in our document. Nesting is the essence of putting one element into another element. If I hover on the left side of my HTML opening element here, then you see that I have an arrow. If I click that arrow, the rest of the code inside of these two HTML elements here, they get collapsed because all of this code is nested inside of this code. That's the definition of nesting. So HTML, the element HTML, is the parent element of the other elements here, of head, of body, of, well, it's a grandparent of meta and title. And likewise, the head element is a child element of HTML. And the body element is the child element of the HTML. And the meta is the child element of the head, which is the child element of the HTML. So that is what nesting is. And next up, let's look into some very common elements that you are going to be seeing and writing in HTML. Inside our body is where most of our HTML lives. We are going to nest now an H1. We're going to just write H1. We don't need to write the brackets. And we're going to just hit enter. And then we're going to write, this is my biggest header. And then we're going to hit enter. We're going to write H2. This is a slightly smaller header. And then we're going to write H3, even smaller. So you can go on like this, H4, here we go, H5, another one, H6, it's proper small, and I think that's all we have. Yeah, there is no H7. So we have 6 headers to go wild with. You rarely use more than 2. Otherwise it starts to get a bit messy and a bit hard to read your document. But let's save this document here by hitting Control S, or either just going up here and saying save. Save it as whatever you want, wherever you want. We're just going to double click that to open it in our browser. And here you see the 6 different headings that we have created, going from biggest to smallest. If we right click and inspect, we also see that it's the exact same code. being highlighted when we hover above each element. Back in our code editor, create a little indent here. We're going to create some space between our H6 element, and we are going to write a P. And we're going to hit enter. This P stands for paragraph, which is used for any text that doesn't have special meaning, basically most text. So here we write the main part of an article, for example. And we save. We can also add, if you start writing lorem, you get this suggested, you can hit enter, and it's going to fill out a bunch of lorem ipsum example text. We hit save. You see that my text kind of got jumbled together, it got indented, yours might not. And if you're struggling to see the entirety of the text on your Visual Studio Code, I would like you to hit Alt-Z. That's gonna make your code basically wrap so that you can see all of your code on whatever size that your Visual Studio Code is at. So Control-Z, it's a very useful tool. So back in our browser, we can simply refresh because it's still finding the same file. And here we see that we have our paragraph text with the lorem ipsum and everything. We see that it has been shown like this with an arrow, and when we click it, we can see the text itself. Let's clean up our code a bit. Let's delete everything apart from H1, H2 headers. And then we save. Back in our browser. Yeah, it's a bit easier to read like this. So this is the majority of the traditional text you will use, headers and paragraphs. And this is very reminiscent of newspapers. And in fact, when you are writing your HTML document, you should be thinking about making it hierarchical as in a newspaper. You should be writing your HTML semantically, which it is called. So that means that you always have an H1 before an H2. And before a paragraph, you might usually have a title as well, so you need to have an H1, let's say. If you were to include a picture, which you of course can do, we're going to write that in now. We're going to write IMG. We're going to hit enter. And then in Visual Studio Code, it gives you these two attributes called src and alt. It stands for source and alternative text. Actually, we're just going to find a picture now because we need a picture. So we're going to go to Unsplash. It's a free resource with free pictures to use. We're going to write emoji. We are going to scroll down, and these are the free pictures to use here. We're going to choose this phone, let's say. We're going to download it, and we are going to save it in our desktop or wherever you are saving your file that you're working on in your HTML. We're going to save it at that location as well, or in the same folder. So we're going to go back to our code editor. We're just going to quickly see what this picture is called. It is called, starting with Dennis. So we're just going to write Dennis. And there we see that it is suggesting the picture. Then in the alt text, we're gonna just write a mobile phone with emojis. And then we're gonna save, and then we're gonna go back to our browser, back to our document tab here, and we are going to update the file. Let's close this inspect window. As you can see, the emoji picture has been loaded into our page. It is ginormous, but that's the size of the image. So it's showing up exactly like we told the HTML to display it. Back in our document, we are now putting an image element, but we want to nest this image element inside a figure element. So I wrote figure, hit enter, and the element pops up. Now I'm going to target all of this image code. I'm going to Control X, and I'm gonna pop it between these two figure elements. I'm gonna Control V, I'm gonna save, or I'm gonna indent, and now you see that the image element lives inside the figure element. You might have noticed that the image doesn't have another image element. So we are writing image, and there's no closing image bracket. What's up with that? Well, it's because image is one of the few elements in HTML that is self-closing. So you don't need to write image and then another image with a forward slash. It's not necessary. You can write it. It's not gonna show up as wrong on your HTML. It's still gonna work, but it's not necessary. It is a self-closing tag. And then inside the tag, so inside of the image, you are putting the attributes of where the image is from and this alt text, which if we go back to our browser, we inspect the image and we see that the alt text is here. So this is the text that the text-to-speech would use to describe the images on the web page for somebody who is visually impaired. So this is to make the web page as accessible as possible to the most amount of people. So it's always important to include alternative text on every single image. This is a standard practice when creating web pages. Back in our text, we have just nested this image inside our figure. Why did we do that? Well, because another thing I want to have in this document is Figcaption. And here I'm basically giving it the picture, a description that is going to be visually visible to people reading the page. So this is my mobile phone with emojis on it. And I save and I go back to our browser. If we scroll down, let's see. Where is the text? Didn't show up. Why not? I haven't refreshed. Always remember to refresh your page. So this is my mobile phone with emojis on it, exactly like we wrote it. We're gonna learn later with CSS how to style our images, how to make them be less big on our page, how to basically look more appealing. But with this image element and this Figcaption element, we nested these two things inside our figure element, which is inside of our body element, which is inside of our HTML element. Another very popular element to use is a so-called div. So we just write div, we hit enter, and then we see that it has an opening and a closing tag. So inside the div, you can basically put whatever you want. The div, in fact, is whatever you want. It's a catch-all element that we use when we don't have anything else to call that element. So here we can write our H1s, we can write, a figure, we can put, we can put paragraphs here. Whatever you want, you can put in your divs. Many times as well, they're completely empty, and these divs are used as a way to style, let's say, boxes or circles, or just simply visual elements like a line break between texts. And then we use the divs to kind of tailor them to our needs. So a div is very popular. Furthermore, we might want to put all of the elements, all of the code that we have in our body element, we might want to copy it out or cut it out, and we might put let's say a main element here that we then paste all of this code in. So now we have a main that lives in the body. I'm going to collapse the main here, and then maybe under the main we have a footer, and inside the footer, let's say we have a navigation, which is nav, and just going to indent that so it's easier to see. And then maybe above the main, inside our body still, we have a header section. And then maybe here we also have a navigation. So you see, slowly but steadily, we build up the HTML document with all the different and standard elements we have. So header we use for our navigation up top that you usually see in websites, and a footer is the same navigation or information in the bottom that you also see in most websites. The main part is a standard to include with basically everything that is between the header and the footer. We are going to go more in depth on different elements. This was kind of the first taste of what elements are, which ones exist, and which ones are the most common to see, and also what is nesting and how these different elements are nested together. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you did. Consider subscribing if you want to see more tutorials and explanations on code and HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And if you want to learn more about headers and paragraphs specifically, you can go ahead and watch the next video in this playlist. Until the next time we see each other, have a good one.